wonderful time we are having and just great information. And we're going to continue that. We're transitioning now to our panel discussion. And I'm going to introduce our panel and go through it one by one and just share the great leaders that are coming. First is Leslie Hiner. Leslie is Vice President of Programs at EdChoice, where she directs the Foundation's educational programs in collaboration with policymakers, community leaders, and partner organizations. Leslie is an appointee to the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, Indiana State Advisory Committee, and the Indianapolis City Council Ethics and Commission. Please welcome Leslie Hiner. While she's coming in, I'll go through and do the rest of our introductions as they make their way. Next is Josh House. Josh is an attorney with the Institute for Justice. He joined IJ in August 2015 and litigates constitutional cases protecting economic liberty, property rights, school choice, and civil liberties. Please give it up for Josh House. Our last panelist is Brittany Bull. Brittany serves, and they're coming in now? All righty. Brittany serves the U.S. Department of Education as attorney advisor to the General Counsel. Previously, Brittany served the department as attorney advisor to the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights, where she advised senior department leaders about legal and policy issues relating to regulatory reform, cases arising under federal anti-discrimination law and community strategy. Also welcome Brittany Bull. And our moderator for this discussion is our very own. Give it up for Reverend Derek McCoy, who has done a tremendous job throughout our entire policy summit.
The farther you look back in history, the greater you can see into your future. It's basically a paraphrase the Winston Churchill quote that I just mentioned. But when you look at that, it's one thing to look back at our future, and I get that because you do want to understand it and you want to learn from history. The other thing, though, that's really important for us is that we look into our future. And we look at what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how we can be better. So before we start, I don't know, did they show the video yet? Okay, let me show a couple of videos real quick, and then we could go from there. That was the first thing to do, and you got it.
In 1996, there wasn't much of a choice in education. But over the last 20 years, the Friedman Foundation has helped transform schooling in America. From the schoolhouse, to the State House, to right where it matters most. A lot has happened since we first got going. Today, 40% of children go to a school that's not based on where they live. We've gone from 6 school choice programs in 1996 to 61 in 2016. Trained more than 1,000 state lawmakers and advocates. Published more than 120 research reports quoted all across America. Saved $1.7 billion for taxpayers, started more than a dozen organizations, and supported hundreds more. And we're just getting started. The future is bright, and it's not just our new name that will take us to the next level. We know what works. Our vision is clear. Successful lives and a stronger society. We are champions of educational freedom, quality, opportunity, and success. We've got this from here. Welcome to the future of educational choice.
One thing we want to appreciate and just give an applause for is EdChoice. Great partner, great to be with them. A few years back, I was able to go to their offices and spend several days with them, and they just, what we're doing to you, they did to me in the terms of education. So they just fire hosed us with information, which was just fun, fantastic. And so I encourage that. But one of the things we're going to discuss, amongst other things, and we have a varied panel here, which I'm so thankful for them being here, and I think it's going to be great. again, Josh over here from Institute for Justice. We got Leslie from Ed Choice, and we have Brittany Bull from Department of Education, and more specifically in the Office of Civil Rights. They all handle different issues, but one of the things that I wanted to talk about a little bit in general, we're going to have a broader thing, but if they queue up the one video on Blaine Amendment, I just want to play that really quick so that kind of gives you some perspective. Not everybody's going to talk about that, but it'll give you some perspective, because oftentimes we hear about Blaine Amendment and say, what is that? So let's take a look at this real quick before we just start talking.
The term Blaine Amendments is a generic word that we use to refer to a number of state provisions that were put in constitutions in the 19th century that basically were about the same thing. These were all provisions, the purpose of which was to say public funds should not go to sectarian institutions. The Blaine Amendments have put a barrier that stands in the way of school choice programs in some states. So even though the Supreme Court has said that tax credits are fine or school vouchers are fine for kids going to religious schools, in some states, these Blaine Amendments are standing in the way of choice-based reform. Today, the best argument in favor of the Blaine Amendments is that it makes good sense to keep church and state separate. Supporters of the Blaine Amendment can say governments have scarce funds, and it's important to use public funds for public purposes, and a state can decide, if it wants to, that it's going to have an even higher wall of separation than the one that the Constitution requires. The challenge to the Blaine Amendments rests on the claim that discrimination against religion, or discrimination on the basis of religion, is unconstitutional. The U.S. Constitution does forbid states from establishing a religion. But at the same time, the Supreme Court has said that the First Amendment allows states to treat religious and secular institutions in an even-handed way, on an equal basis. And they've gone further. The Supreme Court has interpreted the Constitution to mean that governments may not discriminate against institutions or persons just because they're religious. That rule trumps any effort by states to experiment with stricter rules of their own. So there's at least two ways to sort of fix the Blaine Amendment problem. One way is for the states themselves, either in their legislatures or in their courts, to interpret these amendments or maybe just get rid of them. If a state decides, as Missouri has, to interpret its own law in a strict way to forbid any funding from reaching a religious entity, then the only way to fix this problem is for the U.S. Supreme Court to say that this kind of discrimination violates the First and 14th Amendments.
Great, thank you. All right, that kind of sets the stage. Well, I'm excited, and I'm going to toss it all the way down to the end down here. I met this young lady, and I should say this woman, incredible person, and I categorized you everywhere right there, didn't I, Brittany? But I want to make sure I'm politically correct. But we met Brittany when we went to a meeting not too long ago, but I was fascinated when we talked afterwards because you were a teacher. And you were in some pretty interesting environments. Why don't you tell us a little bit about the environments that you taught in? And then this is a softball because it's one of those things, why did you turn from there and become an attorney, and now you're at the Department of Education?
Well, thank you for that question starting off. I'm Brittany. I'm very pleased to be here with you all this morning. That is true. I started out my career after college as a teacher. I taught 8th grade language arts in Little Haiti in Miami in a public school. And most of my students were immigrants from Haiti right after the 2010 earthquake had ravaged the country. And so my students had a lot of challenges to overcome. Coming to a new country, they had to learn a new language. Many of them were living in poverty in an area that was riddled by violence, and yet they still had to come to my classroom every day and were expected to pay attention and learn. And so it was an extremely challenging environment to be a teacher in, and I think also a challenging environment to be a student in. And through my experience as a teacher, I realized that the opportunities that we were providing for our students were just not good enough. and I wanted to be a part of that change on a broader level. So I went to law school knowing I wanted to do education policy.
Wow.
And that led me to where I am today at the U.S. Department of Education. I have served in the administration for the past year as the attorney advisor to the Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights, so working on civil rights issues. And this week I actually transitioned into a new role advising the General Counsel about a broader array of education, policy, and legal issues. So in the Office for Civil Rights, which is where I had the opportunity to meet everyone from CURE, we oversee a variety of federal civil rights laws, and our goal is to make sure that students have the equal access to education, and that means an education free from discrimination. Wow. Having the freedom to be educated equally with their peers. And the specific laws over which we have jurisdiction would be things like Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964, which ensures that students have an education free from discrimination based on race, color, or national origin. We also have jurisdiction over Title IX, and that ensures that there's no discrimination based on sex. Additionally, we have jurisdiction over Title II of the ADA and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, which ensure that there is no discrimination based on disability in the educational context. We have jurisdiction over other statutes, but that's the main bulk of the kind of work that we do. And so that is an important focus of our work at the Education Department, and I think an important element of educational freedom. I know you're going to hear from some of our other panelists about other types of choice and freedom in the education context, but I also think an education free from discrimination is an important aspect of that educational freedom.
Wow, that's phenomenal. You said a mouthful there. When you were a teacher, and I'm going to relate this back to where you're doing now, when you were a teacher, did you see the same opportunities in Little Haiti that you saw maybe across the county line or in that? And then when you saw perhaps the same or the inequities, how can that be influenced now by policy in the Department of Education? Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Miami-Dade County Public Schools is a very diverse school district. There are, Little Haiti has schools that are quite different from the schools on Miami Beach. Those are very different contexts. Yeah. And I think the starkest reality for me was comparing the school that I taught in to the public school in Minnesota that I went to. I went to public school my whole life, and the opportunities that I had were very different than the ones that my students had. And so for me, that motivated and empowered me to work towards the goal that every student, regardless of their zip code, regardless of where they grew up, should have equal access to an excellent education. And that is something that we work towards. And relating that back to the work that I do now with the federal government, as you may know, Secretary DeVos is an enormous proponent of school choice and has spent decades throughout her career working towards that goal of ensuring that all students have equal access to an excellent education. But she also recognizes that our role as the federal government is not to come in with a heavy hand and create some sort of national school choice program to foist it upon states. Secretary DeVos recognizes the diverse and unique needs of all of the different states and communities within states, and wants to empower those states and local governments to craft educational programs that are specific and best suited to those unique needs. And so that is what we are attempting to do at the federal government level. Just to give you an example of something that we're doing, in accordance with President Trump's executive order to all administrative agencies, we at the Department of Education are engaged in what we call the Regulatory Review Task Force. And that means we go through all of our regulations and examine them and ask ourselves, are these things still up to date? Are they moot because maybe the Supreme Court ruled on this issue? Is this good policy? Should we still be putting our thumb on the scale as the federal government in this context? And so we have endeavored to try and rescind any guidance documents that fall within that category so we can unleash the freedom of the states and local governments to educate their students as they best see fit. And so that's one of the many initiatives, and hopefully I'll be able to talk about some others later, but that's a big, broad thing that we're doing at the department to try and empower states and local governments to retake control over those reins of education.
Wow. Wow, that is something else. Appreciate that. Appreciate that. We're going to get back to you shortly. Josh, I would say you, but then, the chivalry thing kicks in, so I got to go to Leslie first, women first.
We like you though.
Maybe I should say age before beauty. You younger. No, go ahead.
Careful.
No, but Leslie, you have been with us now a couple of times, and we really appreciate you and appreciate the organization. But what I've gotten to know about you is that you are a hard worker in education.
Right.
You care deeply. You
I
care
do.
passionately about this.
I do.
Help us understand kind of broadly some of the scope before we maybe get into some of the nuts and bolts of some of these real issues that we may be able to fight, but a little bit broadly on the scope of education, where we are in the level. Are we winning the fight, or are we getting these advances? What I loved about what Brittany said is, when Secretary DeVos was put into office, there was a little bit of controversy around that. Oh, she's going in. But I had people that were in Detroit City who were passionate in that city, and they said, man, she's been one of the biggest advocates and helps and supports in the city because she saw the disparities in Detroit and tried to really help some of those aspects in that area, which I think was ultimately one of the things that really qualified her for the opportunity. I mean, be in any position, you're just an average, regular person who has a deep passion and has a skill set to be able to do it. But how are we looking in terms of educational choice, advancing the bar, and just really giving kids opportunity to be educated in our country?
Well, that's the right question, Derek, because that's the point. That's the point of all the work we do. And good morning. I'm so delighted to be with you. Really, as I was mentioning to Derek earlier, it feeds my soul to be here with you. And I am working in a pretty hostile environment these days, so I could use that feeding. Thank you very much. It's very helpful. So when you asked me the question of are we winning, what's happening, we are absolutely advancing the ball. But in some ways, you may not see that occurring. The press is pretty awful. Press was pretty awful to poor Betsy DeVos, who I knew her long before I started working for EdChoice, and she's just that person. She and her husband both, they give you the shirts off their back if that's what you needed. They're just nice people. And so all the horrible things you've heard, just let it go in one ear and out the next. But this is, I think, also a little bit symptomatic of what I'm seeing in school choice right now, because our opponents are pretty loud. They're loud, they can be nasty, and it can be pretty harsh out there. But the truth lies somewhere else. So I was struck by Starr's comments earlier when she was talking about the Black Caucus in states. And she's right, it's tough to work with the Black Caucus in any state legislature. However, for me, I'm a very strong believer in not looking at the surface like the press does and generalities, but for me, it's all about the people. I got involved in school choice because of one child who needed a choice. And I learned that lesson. It was that one child who moved me to advocate for so many others. And I'm finding the same thing. So if you look at the issue politically, it's just politics. But when you approach the Black Caucus, but you're approaching an individual in that caucus and having that conversation about people in the legislator's district, and how are your kids doing? And could they use some options? And what about your faith-based schools? Is that important to your constituents? All of a sudden, the conversation shifts from the nasty political, I can't talk to you, to, oh yeah, can you help my kids? Because yeah, I've got a lot of kids who need help in my district, and I want to help them. So for me, I think that's the most important piece. When you ask me if we're advancing, yes, there are more programs that are coming online. The existing school choice programs, they continue to be expanded year after year after year because the demand is there. But what's really important to me is for every person that I talk to who gets it and who's willing to, like Governor Bevins told us last night, to be bold and to stand up for these children and families. That matters, and we're winning that.
Awesome, awesome. Sounds like you were listening last night. That was good.
Absolutely, you bet.
Hey, Josh, I really appreciate what Institute for Justice is doing and the work you guys are doing. You know, I always look at law as so important in terms of a lot of these rules and a lot of things that are out here. Tell us what you see on the horizon, one, about what you guys are doing organizationally, but also what you see on the horizon. And I know we kind of pointed to the Blaine Amendment, and I know you guys are working on some serious cases there. So love to hear that. And, you know, again, this crowd is some of the, I call them the folks in the field that say, hey, how can we jump in?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so the Institute for Justice is the national law firm for liberty. We are a nonprofit civil liberties law firm. We only do 4 issues: property rights, free speech, what we call economic liberty, which is the right to be free from unreasonable government regulations and do the job of your choosing. But the 4th one is school choice. And there has not been a day at IJ since we opened in 1991 where we have not been defending a school choice program around the country. When I say defending, the typical ways in which we defend them are, the government will pass a school choice program, and then it's inevitably challenged by a group like, say, the teachers' unions. And then you've got this fight between the government and the teachers' union, and no one is representing the parents in all of this. And so where we come in is intervene on behalf of the parents, except us.
Man, come on, they amen here.
Okay. Yeah, I'm used to talking to one judge, so a room of like 100 people is. That's actually where we come in, is we will what's called intervene on behalf of the parents and represent their interests. And frankly, we will do a better job arguing for the program than the government does, who's the one that passed it. And so we'll come in, and so we've been doing that for years. And to answer your question about the future, we're shifting gears a little bit and attacking what you saw that video about earlier, those Blaine amendments. We are going to be affirmatively, not waiting around for some program to get passed, but affirmatively challenging the Blaine amendments as unconstitutional discrimination, both as religious, unconstitutional religious discrimination, like under the First Amendment, but also under just the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The government has to have a good reason between discriminating between groups of people, and it can't arbitrarily favor or disfavor some group because it doesn't like them. And as that, the video mentioned, really, sectarian, at the time these Blaine amendments were passed, sectarian was code for Catholic. Public schools back then were Protestant. It was Protestant school versus non-Protestant school. And say when my ancestors came over and were Catholic and wanted to send their kids to a school that taught the Bible as they understood it, a lot of states retaliated. And so, the way it's being enforced today is different. It's no longer Catholic versus Protestant. It is secular versus religious as a whole, but these laws are still being enforced in a discriminatory manner. And so I'm happy to talk more about our cases that we have coming up, but that's the next step, I think, is kind of affirmatively challenging these things so that they're not in the way when a good program does get passed.
Wow, that's good, that's good. You guys are working in this space too, right, Leslie?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yes, in fact, just this year, I've been doing kind of a soft launch of the EdChoice Legal Defense and Education Center. Now, I'm here to tell you that, so this guy over here and my other friends at the Institute for Justice, they're a big reason for that, because kept getting those phone calls. Leslie, really need your help. Can you help with this? The challenges are great. challenges are really great. And as every time we win a case, then the next case, they'll come at us from a little different angle. And every time it's just trying to work the angles. Even though it was 2002 when we had the Cleveland voucher case, U.S. Supreme Court said, yeah, vouchers are constitutional, no question, we're all good. And yet here we are, 2018, and we're still fighting about it, which is a little exasperating. But the good news is that we work together. We've worked together for a long time, and there are a lot of good people who want to see us succeed. So we put in a lot of late hours, but it's okay. It's okay. Again, it's because of that one. It's that one child. Could be your child. Could be your neighbor's child, who is desperate for the help to be in a good place where that child can learn. Okay, that's enough motivation for me. That's good. Okay, we'll work for that.
I love that. I love that. I'm coming back to the cases because I'd love to hear more about that. I want to find out too, from a broader kind of Department of Education and looking at what are ways that we can kind of expand our liberty and our freedom from this educational side of things, and especially, you know, I was able to be a part of a conversation a couple years ago now with the former Secretary of Education, and actually we had the Office of Civil Rights in there, and I felt like some of the things that they were talking about to me, I said, this doesn't sound, there was something a little bit over aggressive in my perspective about some of the ways that they were going after things. And I said, I don't know, I felt like it almost brought detriment to some of the schools and kids versus freedom and ability and liberty to them to really go for it. So can you talk about that a little bit, Brittany?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a wonderful Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights, Ken Marcus, and he is a proponent, he repeats this phrase often, we enforce the law as it is written, no more, no less. And that gets back to what you're talking about here, Derek, because we want to make sure that we are interpreting the law exactly as it is written, fidelity to the law, but not doing more than that, not being activist. And as the federal government, forcing ourselves, you know, upon states and local districts in ways that Congress has not instructed us to do through our statutory rights. So that is something that we're very cognizant of during this administration. And we're also trying to take a new approach to really be proactive partners with districts and with colleges and universities. Instead of taking an approach, and maybe this is what you're referring to, where we really aggressively target, go after, and then shame schools publicly for some sort of alleged or actual violation of civil rights laws, we want to actually prevent civil rights violations before they occur. Because after they occur, the harm is largely done, right? So we would like to proactively intervene and make sure that those things don't happen. And so one program that we offer at the department is our technical assistance program. And I think during the previous administration, what I've heard from stakeholders in schools was that they were apprehensive to approach us to receive technical assistance because they thought that the department would then use that as a hook to aggressively target them for some sort of investigation. And we are trying to disseminate the message that that is absolutely not the case during this administration. We want to partner with you. So if that is a message that you can help us circulate throughout the communities, that would be greatly appreciated. Through our technical assistance program, districts, colleges, universities can approach us and collaborate with our team of specialized civil rights attorneys to help craft policies that are in compliance with civil rights laws and ensure that everything that they're doing at their schools is appropriate. And so that is something that we hope more schools will take advantage of. Unfortunately, civil rights violations still inevitably occur, and we are a law enforcement agency that absolutely will go after those schools and hold them accountable for those violations. And I just want to mention a couple really high-profile investigations that we have going on right now that you may have heard about in the news. These ones tend to surround Title IX because that is an initiative that has been of high priority to the Secretary. which is investigations related to sexual assault. And in the wake of the Larry Nassar scandal at Michigan State University and his criminal conviction, we opened a directed investigation into that university, have had teams of attorneys on the ground interviewing hundreds of people, reviewing documents, investigating the alleged sexual assault that occurred epidemically on that campus. And we have similar investigations open at Ohio State University and University of Southern California. And so we enforce all of our civil rights laws equally, but at this moment in time, we have a number of very high profile sexual assault investigations. And so another call that I have for you all, because I'm guessing because of your role in the ministry, you likely have people coming to you for advice, people coming to you sharing very personal and traumatic stories. And I know this because I was in that position a number of years ago when I was raped and then came to my pastor to talk about the experience that I had and didn't know where to turn for help. And so I'm guessing that you might have similar experiences as well. And I want you to know that the Department of Education Office for Civil Rights is open for business. If people that come to talk to you would like the Office for Civil Rights to conduct an investigation into their school if this sexual assault happened during an education program or activity, that's what we're here for. We care about that one student who is alleging sexual assault just as much as we care about the giant investigation at MSU, because we want all students to have equal access to their education. And I know from my own personal experience, in the wake of a sexual assault, if that is not handled appropriately by the institution, that can definitely interfere with your access to education and taking advantage of those resources. So that is also my call to you. If you have people who are coming to you for counsel, please know that we are here as a resource. And we can't solve all the problems, but as a team, I hope we can collaborate together to ensure that students have access to their education.
Wow, really appreciate that. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. That was real. And I'll make maybe more of a comment, is that I really appreciated what you said with that, because you're talking about making sure all the kids have equal access to education, equal access to opportunities that are there. And what I found, a few years ago, I'm just going to say it that way, there was a lot of yielding, or I call it yielding around the purse strings. It's like, you better do this, or I'm not going to give you this money. You better do this, and this money is going to be taken away from you. And you saw this over and over again repeatedly, and I'm thinking, is that their role? Is that why? I mean, I do know where the Department of Education gives into the schools, and there's a funding attachment. But at the same time, if the states had that money, or and they were distributing it out, and there are rules to follow. But I just felt like it was almost like this. I hate to say it, this is my own perspective. This is not a CURE perspective. This is me. I felt like it was the mafia trying to tell me, you either follow my way or it's the highway. And I think for a lot of people, that didn't feel like educational freedom. It didn't feel like equal opportunity for everybody. It didn't feel like you were trying to advance the ball for all the kids out there. So I won't put you on the spot to maybe say something about that. But I thank you for your perspective, because it really did help. So let me ask, I'm going to ask the double question, and then we probably will facilitate a few questions out here too, but a double question from Josh and Leslie. Tell me about the cases. I love strategy. I like taking stuff down. I want to see how can we look at some of these places and say, man, take this one down, get rid of some of the barriers and let it go. Because I hate when I hear the narrative, well, it's either choice or it's the current system. I don't get that. Or you hear the people say, well, if we use all the money on the choice, we won't have no money for this current system. Well, the current system broke. Y'all don't need no money. But on the other side, not up there, but you have to be doing the job you're supposed to do, is educating the children.
Yeah.
But I would love to see the strategy of how we remove some of these aspects and see some things move forward. So tell us about cases and go for it. I know they want to hear. I want to hear.
Well, I will say that the future is looking pretty bright. The Supreme Court decided a case last year called Trinity Lutheran Church versus Comer, it was in Missouri. It involved a preschool that was a church-run school that was receiving I guess it was recycled rubber for playgrounds or tar or something. And so basically Missouri said, well, we have a Blaine Amendment, and so you cannot participate in this program. And the Supreme Court said, no, you cannot, a program that is available to all, you can't simply withdraw that from churches. And I think that principle is what we think kind of could guide us for the future in terms of opening some doors here. Just to stay on the subject of preschools, for example, California has a Blaine Amendment. They also have what's called the California State Preschool Program. It's the largest preschool program in the country. It's for 3 and 4-year-olds, and it provides state funding in the form of these, actually 2 different forms. One in the form of kind of a voucher through an intermediary, and also a direct reimbursement to a preschool. But because of California's Blaine Amendment, all of the various guidance documents and everything say religious preschools cannot or need not apply, so to speak. They cannot participate in this program. And so that's a great example of, this is something that is designed for needy families. This is designed to open doors. And actually the program itself emphasizes parental choice, recognizing that especially at younger ages, different children are at all different levels of kind of development and ability. And so choice is more important than ever kind of at those very, very young ages, and yet the state is telling a large swath of preschools not to apply. And then kind of on the other end of the educational spectrum, we recently filed a case in Washington involving a work-study program. And many of you may be aware that work-study programs work to give employment and financial assistance to students who are in college. And often the job that they're able to get is related in some form to the major that they're studying for. So it's both a way to provide financial assistance as well as to develop skills that will be useful for them in the future. But because Washington has a Blaine Amendment, the Department of Education in Washington will not let a student work at a religious employer. And you can imagine for people who want to go into medicine, they can't work at religious hospitals. For people who want to become teachers, they can't work at religiously affiliated schools. So this is not just anti-religious discrimination. This is hurting the bright futures of the college students who need the financial assistance as well as the work experience. And it's bizarre because I could work at a soup kitchen and get paid, but if the same soup kitchen is run by a church, I can't get paid for that. I mean, it's simply the religious status. It has nothing to do with the actual work. And one of the, I think, best examples of kind of how this is out of control is the state of Washington requiring this giant questionnaire to be signed by the employer, trying to assess how religious they are and whether they're actually religious. Depending, I know that there probably are a diversity of political views here, but that to me seems like a perfect example of government overreach if there's ever one.
Absolutely.
So those are both areas that we see kind of potential for these offensive cases to be brought. We've already filed the Washington one. The preschool one is one where we're trying to get in touch with people who run religiously affiliated preschools in California. So if you happen to know anyone, please get in touch with me. I'm sure my contact information, it's on the internet, but
we got some California people here.
Great, I would love to talk to them.
And attached to preschool, by the way, I think.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to them. I'm from California myself. I grew up in Oakland, and actually I was the benefit of my parents sending me to a local private school, just because the area in which I grew up in was not a particularly nice neighborhood. So so anyway, would love to talk to the Californians here, but I'll toss it over to Leslie if there's anything on the kind of legislative front.
Well, I think, actually I want to share something on the litigation front, which is just as I see that we're making a difference, again, it's one person at a time who's willing to make a difference that matters. I'm beginning to see now the same thing happening in the courts. Now, I can remember in the early days of litigation that if we got a good decision out of one state court and then we'd bring it up when there was litigation in another state court, that state court, didn't really want to hear us talking about the other state. So to explain this more fully, It's kind of like North Carolina and South Carolina, Oklahoma and Texas. If you're from Oklahoma, everything in Texas is bad. If you're in North Carolina, what? I hear tell about this South Carolina, but I don't think so. It's like that. Judges will have that same attitude. No, those are some other judges in another state. However, we have really, yeah, judges are people too.
Yeah, I guess so. You're right.
But we've really, I think, crossed into some really good territory now. So let me give you an example. We had a big landmark case out of Oklahoma. I mean, none of us thought that Oklahoma would be able to do vouchers. They had a couple different Blaine amendments, plus a couple other clauses in their constitution that were just really restrictive against religion. It was not good. And the Institute for Justice, we agreed on this point. Yeah, probably not going to be able to do vouchers, but they really wanted vouchers. And the legislators in Oklahoma said, this is what we need for our kids, so we're going to slug it through and try to make this work. Well, lo and behold, we won that case. And not only did we win the case, 9-0, by the way. It was a good day. Really good day.
That's good.
There was a concurring opinion as well. The concurring opinion said, oh, by the way, if you didn't get the message this first time, we really mean it. So it was a very strong opinion. Well, guess what? Just this year, Puerto Rico passed a voucher bill. And of course, Puerto Rico is going through all kinds of trouble right now. And they've been having trouble just keeping the lights on, let alone trying to educate kids. And so it became really clear to people down there, they really needed parents to be in charge and for the churches to step up and have small schools all around the island where they could reach the kids where they are. So they passed this voucher. Now they had a prior decision in Puerto Rico that said, no vouchers in Puerto Rico. But this year, we won that case with
I have to
Erica
chime in here.
from Institute for
I have to
Justice.
chime here. So, we litigated the case and we're happy about the win, but I will take fault for we actually lost the original case back in the early 90s that created the mess in the first place. So we've undone what we did wrong.
I was trying to save you there.
You know what? I feel like the whole story's got to be out there, but we're really happy with how it turned out. And it was another. I mean, it was a very good. It wasn't 9-0, unfortunately, or 7-0 as it may be in Puerto Rico.
Good enough.
But the Puerto Rico Supreme Court did give us a very good opinion, and it's one of those opinions that recognized, you were talking about different states recognizing other states, it recognized that the law has simply changed. It's moved on, especially in federal courts. And to see, I mean, Puerto Rico is not even a state, it's a territory, but to see the territorial court recognizing, the arguments have been answered, I think that bodes really well for future cases, that people are kind of coming around and understanding that it's the parents who are making these choices. It's not the government just handing out handouts to religious or entities. So.
Yeah, that's exactly it. That's exactly it. And that concurring opinion that I mentioned out of Oklahoma, there was a concurring opinion in Puerto Rico that pretty much just mirrored the Oklahoma decision almost word for word.
Wow.
So the justices are understanding that something serious is going on here, and the old way of looking at things, which was just kind of a closed door. I mean, the Blaine amendments, probably the worst thing that they did is that they just closed the door.
Yeah.
So if you wanted to talk about having choice in education for kids so that they could go to the school of their own church, no, that door was just simply closed, and no one wanted to have a conversation about it. Now the door is open. And so now the question is, okay, so how do we make this work? That's the most important piece. Once we get to that point in any state, people can sit down together and have a cup of coffee and reason things out and figure out how to make things work, and that's what's happening now. So that's the good news.
That's good. That's good. I think that's just phenomenal. I want to do this because I like dialogue, and I know it's what's going to. Does anybody have maybe one? Probably got time for about Oh, yes, they do. They said, you stop talking, ask questions. Let's see, we might be able to get Matt over here with the mic to be able to get this on and maybe take a couple of questions. That'd be great.
Thank you guys for coming. My name is Stephen Mosley, and I am a reverend by calling, but I am a student conduct professional by trade. So that means I work for the Dean of Students office at a college. I oversee student conduct. I've done Title IX cases. I've been an investigator for Title IX, done this for 7 years. My question is in that realm, and with school choice, as most of us will care about school choice. When it comes to Title IX, is there going to be another Dear Colleague letter that really explains, what we're supposed to do? So in 2016, Obama came out with a Dear Colleague letter that was garbage. It was political nonsense. 2011 letter was good. It said, hey, look, when we come to sue you, we're looking for, did you use preponderance standard? Did you give both people due rights, et cetera? From my profession, we're looking for that. The second question that deals with school choice, as a Christian, I'm concerned with school choice in a sense, the way I'm seeing it. In college, we have a Pell Grant. You could take it to Liberty University, which is where I graduated from, which is a great college. You could take it to online. You could take it to a public institution, which I work at now. You can take it anywhere. In this movement for school choice, I'm not seeing that. What I'm seeing is, hey, in some places, you could take it to, a charter school, which is competition for the Christian school. Instead of, our kids need to have from K through 12 the same opportunities we have in college, which is, we give you this Pell Grant, you can take it anywhere. The question is, what movement are we doing towards that? Because right now that's disadvantaging the best opportunity for education, which is Christian education. So that's my question for the Pell Grant. And then about Title IX, is there going to be another letter coming out to really explain, here's what we're looking at and here's not what we're looking at?
Absolutely. I guess I'll take the first half and you guys can have the second half. Thank you for your question and also your feedback about Title IX. As you probably know, Secretary DeVos on September 22nd of 2017 rescinded 2 of those Dear Colleague letters that were previously promulgated without going through the appropriate process, which is required by the Administrative Procedures Act when changing the regulation. So those were sub-regulatory guidance. They didn't go through the notice and comment process. And I realize to people who are not lawyers, that sounds like a bunch of gobbledygook, but basically you have to follow the appropriate process in order to change something about the regulation. And so that is what we have been doing at the department since September of last year. So for the past year, we have been undergoing the rulemaking process, and we are getting close to being ready to roll out our notice of proposed rulemaking, which is the appropriate vehicle. And at that time, when we publish our NPRM, there will be a comment period where the public and people like yourself who have experience in this area, we highly encourage you to weigh in during that public comment period and give us feedback about the draft. And the beautiful part about the process is that we are able to collect feedback from all different stakeholders and then have the opportunity to revise the NPRM before we issue our final regulation. And that regulation will then have the force of law, but it will serve the purpose that you're talking about by giving more clarity to people in the field and also students about what their rights are under Title IX. And so that's something that we have been engaged in. We've been hearing from a lot of stakeholders, and we look forward to hearing from more stakeholders like yourself about that process, because we do recognize the important on-the-ground experience that you've had in helping us craft the best possible policy. So thank you for your hard work in that area, and we look forward to hearing more feedback about that. One quick thing I want to add before I turn it over to the other panelists about the Pell Grants. I do want to add that during this administration, it was July 1st of 2017, we actually restored access to Pell Grants for year-round school, which was previously not available. And Secretary DeVos believes that this is extremely important for students to have the flexibility and be empowered to finish their schooling at a timing that works best for them. And so that is one of many examples of things that even though Secretary DeVos and the federal government believes we should be hands-off, there are different ways in which we can return that power to students, to districts, to states, to ensure that they can seek the education that best fits their unique needs.
Wow, that's good.
So I'm really glad that you raised that question. Saul Alinsky, who wrote Rules for Radicals, would not like this group at all. He taught that one of the best things you can do if you're trying to win a war is to appropriate the language of your opponents. Now, I am sorry to say that I see that every day and confront it every day. So full time for us to just work on messaging to try to actually just tell the truth. Good news is that's easy. But I will go into states sometimes and people will say, well, we already have school choice, except they don't. Or when I went to Vermont recently and I said, hey, you guys were the very first school choice state in the country. And they said, do we have school choice? Yes, they do. And they've had it since 1869. But no one really, they didn't think of it that way. Anyway, so my clue when you asked this question was when you talked about charter schools. Charter schools are a form of public school choice, and they cannot in any way have any kind of religious instruction. You're right. Now, if you, in your state, if you had a voucher system or a tax credit scholarship system, then the money that the legislature appropriates for a child's education, then the parent could take that money to any school, including any religious school. Especially after IJ had been there and litigated the Blaine Amendment, and we were good to go.
There you go.
If I could jump
Right.
in too.
So that's real choice, where parents can choose those religious schools as well. That's real.
Yeah.
I would say the strongest form of, you mentioned tax credit voucher, the strongest form of that sort of universal choice is what's called the ESA programs, or the Education Savings Account. What this is almost like an HSA for healthcare. It is a bank account where the money can, come from either the state program or perhaps even through some sort of scholarship source. But the fact is that once the money is just in this account, that account belongs to the parents, and they choose where that money goes. It could go to tutoring, it could go to homeschooling, or it could go to a school, a private school, whether religious or not. It's entirely within the parents' choice, and this is something that Tim Keller, who works with me at the Institute for Justice, developed after we had litigated a couple states. I know that EdChoice has really been involved with pushing them as well, but we've seen some success. In fact, Nevada passed the ESA program, and it's only because of a kind of funding blip that it's not up and running. But that really, I think, would provide the clearest form and easiest, most simplest form of kind of universal school choice. Unfortunately, there have been legal battles surrounding them, and we'll keep fighting that. But
We got time for really zero questions, but we got two. I'm going to do two because I know JC's over here. We just have a quick question. That's good. And then I'm going to defer to Charlotte because I want to make sure Ms. Charlotte McGuire gets her question in, being in the education space. So go ahead.
On the broader issue of equal access, I guess, we are seeing in our public universities repeated instances of viewpoint discrimination, particularly against conservative voices. And these universities receive public funds. They enroll students who receive public grants. Are you aware of any effort in your agency or within Congress to deal with this issue?
Good question. Good question.
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that this administration takes very seriously. And there was recently a conference that I attended at the U.S. Department of Justice specifically focused on free speech. And Attorney General Jeff Sessions and his team have filed a number of amicus briefs in cases where students have been alleging that their free speech rights have been violated. And as a result of those briefs, sometimes schools have actually changed their policies without the case even being litigated. Wow. So I do think that we have had an impact. And at the Department of Education, we are also strong proponents of free speech on campus, right? The common phrase about free speech is that the solution to speech you don't like is more speech, right? And that's something that we definitely stand behind. In the Office for Civil Rights, we don't have jurisdiction specifically over the First Amendment, but sometimes the First Amendment is implicated in cases dealing with sex discrimination, race discrimination, disability discrimination, allegations. And so the First Amendment is something we analyze in our analysis to ask ourselves at the appropriate point in the analysis, is this speech that is protected by the First Amendment? And so that is an important part of the analysis that we do when we are investigating complaints.
Ms. Charlotte?
Thank you very much. Charlotte McGuire, State of Ohio School Board. I don't know if you're aware of the Supreme Court pending case of the electronic classroom of tomorrow, which is an online school option where they have been found guilty of getting money from the state coffers, and there may be a clawback of $60 million because they were charging full-time equivalency as opposed to participation time on the computers. And I think this gets back to Brittany and the messaging. Choice, we have public choices. The big issue in Ohio is we lost a Supreme Court DeRoff case in terms of funding public school. So it gets down to choice options, universal, whether they're religious or public charters, versus traditional public schools. So it becomes more about the money than the children.
Right.
And so how do we frame the message? Because with the online charters like Ohio K-12 Academy, there's a question about privatizing, where you have a sponsor of a public charter choice, and the fact that the sponsor takes so much money off the top and then distributes so much to the actual learning practices in the school system. How do we overcome that? Because messaging is important, and they're using the word choice, as you know, Brittany. As a matter of fact, traditional public schools are now saying they are the real choice.
Right.
So, and parents still want options. I'm using the word options.
Yeah.
So how do we get the message out? Because there are some privateers out there that are taking public education dollars for gain, I guess. I don't know what they're taking it for.
Good question. Good question.
Yeah. I think the biggest travesty in the battle over school choice and public schools, the biggest travesty is that it has caused people to not talk. That's a problem. That's a real problem, because the way you solve what you're talking about is when people whose kids are in the public schools, people whose kids are in private schools, the pastors, the community leaders, when we all sit down and talk to each other about how to help our children, when we put the needs of our children first ahead of our own needs for money, power, ego, whatever, when we put those kids first and we keep them there, we keep them right out in front of us all the time, then it's surprising how people who may not like each other very much, they'll talk. Then they'll talk. But this is where the breakdown comes into play. So the money issue is, really, for me, it's just a simple point. The money needs to go to the child. The parent makes the decision. Public education should be about educating all our kids, not just some of our kids, not just in one way, but in any way that they need so that they can learn, whatever that is. That helps to, once we frame it up that way, that the money is not for a school building or not for somebody's career, although the careers are important. Careers are really important. But the careers are funded when the parents send their children to the place where people are working. Okay? And parents will do that when that's a place where they know their children can learn. So that piece applies both to private schools, public schools, charter schools, magnet schools. So the funding issue can become about the children rather than about the institutions as soon as we start talking about it in that way. And then public schools are funded when parents send their children there because maybe that's the right school. So the that question goes away pretty quickly, again, once you start putting the needs of the children right in front of you and you don't let that go.
It's good. Good. Well, let's give a round of applause for our panel.